Welcome to Grassroots Iowa, conversations at the crossroads of faith and politics, the show where we explore how timeless values shape the decisions that affect our families, our communities, and our state. Today, we're diving deep into that intersection with a man who has spent a lifetime living it out. Our guest is Pastor Brad Sherman, a devoted husband, father, grandfather, a businessman, a former Iowa State representative, and now a candidate for governor of Iowa. Actually, for more than 4 decades, Brad has served as a pastor here in Iowa, starting his ministry training all the way back in 1975. Alongside his wife, Carol, he's poured his heart into spiritual leadership and community service, including co-founding Informed Choices Medical Clinics, of which I'm a big fan. He's walked alongside Iowans through every season of life, from the pulpit to the state house, always guided by faith, principle, and a deep love for this state. Brad believes Iowa has a special role to play in restoring the constitutional and moral foundations that made America and our heartland strong. As Brad seeks the Republican nomination for governor, he's bringing a unique blend of pastoral wisdom, real-world experience, and unapologetic conviction to the conversation. So whether you're concerned about faith in the public square, the future of Iowa families, education, life issues, or how we govern with integrity, this episode is for you. Stick around as we sit down with Pastor Brad Sherman for an honest conversation about leadership, values, and what it means to lead Iowa at this critical crossroads. So let's get started. Brad, welcome to Grassroots Iowa.
It's great to be with you, Jeremy.
I'm excited, man. I'm ready to dig in, and I'll tell you what, I wanted to start with a post that Governor Kim Reynolds put out yesterday, actually, and I just want to read that to you real quickly, and maybe we can unpack it a little bit. She's talking about, I guess, in a sense, the competition, Rob Sand, who's running for the Democrat nominee for governor of Iowa. And it says, Rob Sand wants to be Iowa's governor. Here's what he's actually running on: overhauling our elections to mayor of California, because apparently one of the most secure systems in the country isn't good for Democrats, legalizing marijuana, ignoring data from states that have done it, showing worse public health outcomes and tax revenue that never really materializes, eliminating MCOs, a model 40-plus states rely on to deliver Medicaid efficiently, and ending educational freedom, pulling thousands of Iowa kids from schools that actually work for them. This isn't an accountability agenda, it's a California agenda with an Iowa zip code. That's a pretty bold statement there by Governor Kim Reynolds. I'd love to get your take on what she had to say.
Well, there's four key issues there. I don't know which one you'd like to tackle first.
I know, it's pretty deep.
Yeah. Well, I think the first one there, Jeremy, was overhauling our elections.
Right.
To mirror California. Now, I've already heard about this to some degree before she put this post out, but I understand that Rob Sand, I heard him say on a video that he's not a big fan of the two-party system.
That's kind of scary.
And so as we were talking about this, one of the issues is erasing the lines. And, if you erase the lines between Republican and Democrat, we're moving into a whole new area there that has lots of problems. In fact, it's almost similar to something called ranked choice voting, which they had up in Alaska, which turned out to be a disaster. And so the people people have to pick their first, second, and third choice, and then everything plays out from there, and you don't have any runoff or anything like that. So you can really get the wrong person very easily.
Right.
This, I think, what he's talking about is a little bit different, but I think it gets back to the whole issue of what kind of a government are we supposed to have in America? Right. Article 4, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution says the United States will guarantee to every state a Republican form of government. Now, I know that isn't necessarily directly referring to the party,
right?
But there is a connection. Republicans ought to believe in a republic. Democrats, and as we've seen demonstrated many times, believe in a democracy.
Right. And most people don't even understand that this nation is a constitutional republic, and you start to have that conversation with people, and you start to run into the ignorance, and I think that's kind of stems from our school system, but that maybe will come out later in the conversation.
And that's a very important thing that I believe that should be taught in our schools, the difference between ththose two things. In fact, I hear a lot of Republicans talk about our democracy this, our democracy that, and it makes me sort of tense up every time. It's like, it's like, wait a minute, do you realize what you're doing? You're planting seeds there and that somehow the mob is supposed to rule. The majority of the people, the majority never rules in this country.
Right.
It's the majority of those that vote.
Exactly.
First off, who elect representatives, and then the representatives are supposed to go and do the right thing based on the Constitution and the laws, and because they're good people, because they were democratically elected. But after that, they're supposed to go fulfill the mission of our nation and do the right thing,
Right.
even if the mob happens to change its mind.
Right.
That's how we have stability, and so that's why the founders thought that a democracy was a very, very bad form of government, and they established a constitutional republic.
It's the whole system is fascinating to me. I remember as a child, even in the 1970s, growing up and learning on Saturday mornings between cartoons. The whole Schoolhouse Rock. I'm just a Bill sitting here on Capitol Hill, and you learned a lot about our government in an era where we needed to know what we were made of. And over the years, that's just kind of faded into the background. And now we're a people that don't understand what rules us, how we're governed. And, this kind of thing, kind of back to Governor Reynolds' post, it is kind of scary, if that's part of, Rob Sand's platform and he would like to do away with the two-party system and, switch us over to some other kind of process of electing our government officials, you start to lose who we are in the mix of that. Between the conservative and the liberal party, you might call it Republican or Democrat, but I don't know if I really see it that way. Those are titles, no doubt, and I mean, we all find ourselves somewhere within those ranks, but it's important we understand where the party sits within the conservative values of this nation versus the liberal movement and the ideology that has kind of been birthed over the last 30 or 40 years, even back to the 50s when they took prayer out of school. And you've started to see all of this kind of snowball effect that we find ourselves in this position now. But I do find that rather interesting, the doing away with that two-party system. But that next one, legalizing marijuana, I actually didn't know that was part of his platform. Is that something that you've heard him talk about?
Yeah, I think he just came out with that fairly recently to make a clear statement on that. I wasn't surprised.
Sure.
I assumed that, people in his camp would be for that. I think he's trying to dress it up, claiming it's going to create more business and more tax revenue, and
Right.
be good for the economy and that sort of thing. But as Governor Reynolds said in her post, those things don't tend to materialize. And and I've heard plenty of reports, maybe you have too, about like Colorado, for instance.
Right.
They legalized it out there, and it's just been a disaster.
It has. I have a good friend, Ed Taylor, who's a pastor of a Calvary Church in Aurora, Colorado, and we've had some fairly in-depth conversations about, what was supposed to happen when they did it versus what actually happened. I'm from the state of Arizona, where interestingly, when marijuana was legalized there, it wasn't really a Democrat versus Republican kind of thing. Both parties seemed to come together on that one, which I was pretty surprised by. It's played out rather poorly in Arizona. I'm not surprised by that. When I go back and visit now, it seems like there's more and more homeless. The money that was supposed to be being made, these tax dollars, revenue dollars, they don't seem to be materializing and going to help in any of these areas. And, I don't know where the accountability is with any of that, but I'd be interested in your take. As governor, what do you think? Where do we stand as Iowans when it comes to the legalization of marijuana?
Well, I'll never sign a bill legalizing recreational marijuana. I even had concerns when we opened it up for medical marijuana. Of course, I was not in the legislature at that point, so
Sure.
I didn't really have a say about it. But it's kind of it. I was concerned that it would be the nose of the camel under the tent, as they say. And sure enough, we sort of saw that a little bit of that when I was in the legislature. There was a bill to restrict how much THC could be in those drinks that were being sold at convenience stores.
It's surprising. I saw those for the first time just recently over at a health food store, Natural Grocers or something like that, and I was shocked. And I thought, I didn't know that they were legal to sell that way. So I was, yeah.
Yeah. Well, apparently there was a loophole in the law that was passed, and so there was some of these drinks had as much as 100 milligrams or more of THC in it.
Wow.
And so people would just get totally smashed.
Yeah.
Drinking one of these drinks, and so the bill when I was in the legislature, the bill that came up was to restrict this THC. They were never supposed to be able to do it at all. But now we've got these drinks out there, and so now they said, well, let's cut it back down to, I don't know, whatever milligrams it was, I forget. But they said, oh, it's no different than a beer. Well, it is different. It's a different drug.
Right, very different.
You just can't throw that all in the same basket. But I was for restricting it altogether in these drinks. That was never the intent of the original bill, but yet people in our own party would say, what's the big deal, We'll sit back and have one of these drinks and enjoy Pink Floyd,
Right.
So that's what I heard. That's what I heard one guy say, and I
No.
was kind of shocked by it, but no, I guess that's a different rabbit trail there. But as far as this issue, legalizing it, for the way some states have done, I cannot go there.
Yeah, it's certainly one of those roads that seems to lead to nowhere. Her next point was eliminating MCOs, and I'm going to go ahead and expose myself here a little bit. I had to go look that up. Can you tell us a little bit about why that might be detrimental to the state of Iowa?
Yeah, well, I guess first off, MCO is a managed care organization. It's a private firm that manages federal money and state money that gets combined to pay medical providers for Medicaid.
Gotcha.
So for people it's only for Medicaid.
Yep.
It's managed by private companies over here who do have, I guess you would say, paid insurance, but Medicaid is free insurance for those that are don't have as many advantages as others. But this was moved. These MCOs were created. I think it was under the Branstad administration. And if I remember it correctly, it was created through an executive order. And so it moved the management of the Medicaid in our state to a private entity. And like I said, who are under these other private companies. And so this management is designed to create, and it's got actuary science attached to it and all that. And,
sure.
But nevertheless, there's something called a capitation rate, and it's for different groups of people have a different capitation rate. So they pay a certain amount of money to this private organization, and I think Iowa has about $8 billion a year goes through the Medicaid system.
So not a little bit.
It's from 7 to 9, but I'll just average it out to around 8. And so I think the biggest portion of that comes from federal, and then the state kicks in the other portion. I think the state kicks in about 65 and the state 35% of that.
Gotcha.
And that's a general number, of course. But but nevertheless, that's kind of how it works. And so then this capitation rate, the state manages the money and then gives this money to these private organizations called MCOs, and then they work with the healthcare providers and they sign up the people for Medicaid and they manage the money and pay the providers as people work through the system. So it's a managed care organization. And so the idea is to move it into a private level and to give them an incentive to save money and what have you. And there's pluses and minuses to this.
Sure.
I talked to a lady a while back who had her husband had a stroke, and he needs constant care.
Oh, wow. And
the MCOs were just really dragging their feet and not providing what they needed, and so this is a problem. And so it provides some level of incentive to save money and be efficient, and I think that was the goal of it in the first place. But the other side of it is if we don't have these, it basically, if we were to cancel MCOs, it would revert basically back to Obamacare.
Oh, wow, okay.
And so that's what my understanding is of it and what I've heard from what research I've done. So because we don't have, it would become a big state-run organization.
Sure.
And what could go wrong with that,
Right.
So, but anyway, that's a little bit. So it's got pluses and minuses on it. I think it, so many of these issues, it's not like either or. It's not a black and white issue. There's pluses and minuses on both sides. what it really gets down to as Christians and fellow pastors like us sitting
Yes.
here, what we always look to is the concept of self-government, getting good people who will do the right thing.
Right.
And if you have good people who will do the right thing and who will genuinely try to save money, at the same time generally try to take care of people, well, then everything's going to work out.
Right.
And you just can't make enough laws. There's no amount of paper in the world to make enough laws to make everybody do the right thing all the time. It just doesn't work that way because the human nature is flawed.
Yeah.
And so we do the best we can, but that's why we need God's help in government as much as any place else. In fact, maybe more so than most places. We need God's help. And
who was it? Ronald Reagan that said, "Scariest words you'll ever hear. I'm with the government and I'm here to help."
Yeah.
I think that there's some truth to that. It's not to say that the government doesn't have a lot of really great programs. As a church, we're regularly referring people to government programs that can, help them in, a particular area that they have a need.
Mm-hmm.
We also have a benevolence ministry. I know your church, and, I know as part of your ministry, this has been a big part of who you are as well, just helping people connect with those that can come alongside and not just give them a few dollars to help them out of their situation, but come alongside of them and help them learn how to, the old saying, if you give a man a fish, you teach him, you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, teach him how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime, coming alongside in benevolence. And yes, helping them with financial needs, but also teaching them how to meet their needs themselves. And sometimes that's as much as, teaching people how to go through a job interview. Some of the things that we used to do in school, I don't know that they really do anymore. But yeah, I could see how eliminating, these MCOs could be detrimental to the state. But I also think that, it's important that if it's a state-run organization, that the right people are in place and, not just proper funding, but making sure that there are people in place that are overseeing that. And but it's that next one, back to that Governor Reynolds post. She said that one of the things Mr. Sam wanted to do, and I want to be clear, I've never met Rob Sand. I've actually sent his campaign emails. I'd love to have him on our program. So if you know Rob and you would like to have him sit down and be a part of this conversation, I'd love to entertain that, have him reach out to me. But the bottom line is, her last point there is that he wants to end educational freedom, pulling thousands of Iowa kids from schools that actually work for them. And I think there's layers to that. School choice is a big deal here in the state of Iowa, and there's a lot of people that complain about it, and there's a lot of people that love it. I'm really interested in where you stand, and not just in response to what Governor Reynolds said about Rob Sand and his perspective, but where do you stand, and what do you think about school choice and educational freedom, and what could we do better?
Yeah. Well, that was something we voted on when I was in the legislature. I think it was 23 or 4. That we voted on that and established ESAs, educational savings accounts.
Yes, sir.
Which takes a portion of the money that comes through the state coffers to be able to give to private schools for parents who who chose to send their kids to private school.
Right.
And so, and I've heard Rob Sand talk about this before. This is nothing new.
I have too. Yeah.
He's talked about how he wants to get rid of that. He thinks, and I've heard him say comments like, well, you can't use public money for private schools. And I've heard him say that you can't, if you're going to give them public money, then the private schools have to take all the same students. They can't pick and choose, or they have to provide the same services.
Right.
Well, there's several problems with that. First off, public money is not really public money. It's our money.
Yep.
It's taxpayers' money. And so there ought to be some control and say that parents have over that. Secondly, there's $24,000 a year. The last numbers I heard, the latest numbers that were published, was $24,000 a year is spent per student per year in Iowa.
Right.
Now that's federal money, state money, everything added together.
Combined,
so that's a big chunk of money per student. The ESA accounts are only allowed to have up to $8,000.
Right. I think it's a little under that this year, 7,900 and something.
Is Rob Sand saying that we should give the full $24,000 to the private school? Because if he wants them to provide the same services, if he wants them to take every student, then give them all the money.
Right.
You
Well,
know, so
we've ran into that. Our church, Calvary Community Church, has a Christian school, Calvary Christian Academy, that we're very proud of, and it's kindergarten through eighth grade. We're looking to develop a high school program as well. We've had people reach out to us with kids that have special needs, learning disabilities, all kinds of variables. And they get a little bit upset when we don't have a program that will fit their particular child. And that's what we try to explain to them. They always come at Therese Jurgensen is our director of our school. She has actually served in the state of Iowa at so many different levels of education. She's been a principal. She actually oversaw the Midland School District. She was the superintendent of schools there. She helped in the Department of Education at the state level. And she's a member of the church. She left all of that actually to come head up this program. And she tries to help people understand that part of the picture, that, what is actually coming over to the private school is such a limited portion of what the state actually gets. And keep in mind, the rest of those dollars stay with the school that your child would have been at. So not all of that money is leaving. So if you had a child in a local public school and you choose to put your child in a private school, that $24,000 isn't leaving the school. About $8,000 of it is, but the rest of it stays there, and there's not even a student in need of it. So I'm not exactly sure what everybody's so upset about, but it certainly is an issue that I think needs a lot more conversation so people can understand it better.
Yeah, the issue of competition, school choice. I'm totally behind school choice and educational freedom, because you take for any business, we know that the free market capitalist system produces a better product at a lower price. If you have competition, then you're going to have an incentive to produce a high quality product as cheaply as you can, so that you get the customers.
Right.
Well, that same principle works in education, and the public schools have had a monopoly for a long time.
Right.
There's no incentive there for them to do better and to try to win the students. But now with some competition, if they want those students back, well then, do a better job.
Right.
Quit teaching things that these parents are so upset about that they have to take their kids out of school. And just get back to the basics. And so that competition system is going to work. And I'll tell you another thing that I've heard Rob Sand talk about too, is he says there's no accountability to this money, and we need to have accountability. Well, I beg to differ. I mean, this ESA account is not like some sort of a
slush
payment
fund,
to the parents.
Yeah.
This is held in a savings account that's sent from the state directly to the vendor, whether it's for tuition or whatever.
Right.
And it never gets in the hands of the student, and there's only an approved list of things. That's a very good built-in accountability system right there. And so, but the public schools are what need some more accountability.
Right.
That they're the ones that are not being accountable. There are all kinds of things happening that the public doesn't know about, and just like the school superintendent that was making $400,000 a year.
I read that. That's insane.
Or the school administrator who had a $400 a month clothing budget.
Right.
The public's not aware of these things, So there's accountability needed there too.
Yeah, and I think across the board, accountability is always a good thing. It certainly at the state level, we want accountability with our public school system, and I'm not against accountability within the private school system. We have a private school here, and we're in the process right now of paying an outside firm a significant amount of money to audit our books, so we can make that public, because we think that, accountability is key. We want parents to feel comfortable sending their kids here on every level of that spectrum. And I believe that to be true of most of the, private Christian schools out there. Let's also keep in mind that a lot of families aren't just leaving the public school and going to private schools. A lot of families are choosing homeschooling. And it sounds like the ESAs might be trying to find a way to venture into that to help pay for some of the homeschool curriculum and things of that nature. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, when Governor Reynolds, we were in her office talking about this ESA thing early on before we voted on it, and that was the question I had for her. Does this provide any money for homeschoolers? And
nice.
She said, no, it doesn't. So the ESA program does not help homeschoolers, although I think there should be an option there And homeschoolers obviously don't have the same overhead that even a
Right.
private school or a public school has, so maybe not as much.
Sure, limited.
But then on the other flip side of the coin, there are a lot of homeschoolers who don't want anything to do with it.
Yep.
I mean, I I heard one of my opponents talking to the homeschoolers one day, and I had just spoke and made a point that I thought Common Core should be replaced with common sense, and so
All right.
and so this guy made the comment that you know what, I'm not going to allow Common Core in our public schools, and I won't allow it in homeschools either. And the whole place went flat because those people don't want anybody telling
Right.
them what they can or cannot do. They don't agree with Common Core, but they don't want somebody telling them that they can't.
Right.
So I totally respect the homeschoolers, and that's called freedom.
Yep.
If they want to be separate from the government's nose in their business, that's fine. But even with the ESA accounts, I know a school where my children went. They got accredited, and now they're receiving ESA funds. Now they're having to hire an administrator, and they're looking for more office space because there are requirements that come along with the money they're receiving.
Significant.
And so a good chunk of that money that they are receiving is now being eaten up by an administrator who has to fill out all kinds of paperwork
Right.
and cover. So this is how government works. So there's always a flip side to all this, and so it's just the reality of the world that we live in.
Yeah, and I think your point about competition in the marketplace is valid and incredibly valuable. Actually, I'll revert back to my time in Arizona. We've been here in Iowa for almost 17 years now, but ESAs have existed in Arizona since before we moved, and they were a little different initially, the STOs, state tuition organizations, and it was a little different how you came about receiving the funds. Now, actually, in Arizona, the STO system is still in place, but they also have ESAs, very similar to ours, and you just have to choose each year, are you going to go the STO route or the ESA route? Now, here's the thing, and I'd encourage you guys to look at some of the data out there. When we moved here to Iowa 17 years ago, Arizona was quite a bit lower on the chart than Iowa. Iowa's education system was, stellar. Quite frankly, I grew up in Arizona taking the Iowa assessment tests. That was the nation's standard back then. Well, at least the standard for most of the nation. But things have changed, and the scores, the test scores, and all of the data showing student accountability and classroom activities, and it's changed significantly to the point now where Arizona is actually moving up on the list and Iowa is moving down on the list. I don't think that anyone in the state of Iowa would argue that there's not a problem in our public school system. I know some amazing public school teachers, and I know amazing, staff and administration at public schools. No one's saying that the public school is terrible and, the private school is the only way to go, or you have to either private school or homeschool. There's something to be said, though, for that competition in the marketplace. And that's what happened in Arizona. When the STOs were initially introduced, there was the same kind of annoyance, from folks that were really fond of the public school system. And ultimately, they weren't able to undo it. Actually, Janet Napolitano ran for the governor of of Arizona. She became Obama's, I think, HHS director. But one of her major platforms was, I'm going to undo the STOs. We're going to get rid of this. She won and wasn't able to undo that, thankfully. And I hope that's true. If Mr. Sand were to get into office, that they would be ingrained enough into the fabric of the state that it would be difficult to undo. But at the end of the day, what happened was charter schools came into Arizona, the private school entity became strong, and the public schools started to fight for the kids, and they did better. And their process of education started to change. And all of a sudden, through that, accountability in the marketplace, man, things got better. And because there's a lack of that here for so long, I think that's why we've drawn back, almost like watching the water leave the shore, waiting for that wave to come back in. And so I'm excited where we're at when it comes to education in the state of Iowa. And I think that, if we continue on this road, you'll see the public school system stronger because of it. I mean, go
It
back to,
will.
what was it, 1980 something? Ma Bell, the government stepped in and said, hey, this, the phone company is a monopoly and no one else can do what they're doing. And so they controlled the marketplace. They could charge what they wanted. They weren't, developing better products, and they broke it up in a few different companies. And man, because of that, it got cheaper. The products became better. It's a really great example, and I think that at the end of the day, we'll all be better because of competition. And I think people forget about that. But at the end of the post there that Governor Reynolds made, she says this isn't an accountability agenda; it's a California agenda with an Iowa zip code. I've heard a lot of people reference the governor of California as a similar style of leadership to Rob Sand, or maybe even the governor there north of us in Minnesota. What do you think about that?
Well, I think there's probably some truth to that. I mean, we see the left wing, I don't know, woke positions taking place, in California. I mean, in California, as I've heard that they passed a bill recently that would essentially make it legal to kill a baby up to 28 days after birth. It's called the perinatal period. And you can call it abortion up to the end of the perinatal period, which is 28 days after birth. That's scary. I mean, just some of the woke ideology that we hear. It's like I saw a video of Rob Sand, and he was asked a question: how many genders are there? Very simple question.
I saw that, yeah.
And he avoided the question, not once but twice, and then on the third time back, the guy said, "You still haven't answered the question. How many genders are there?" And he started dancing. At the beginning, at the first question, I've kind of named that little dance. I've called it the sand shuffle.
Nice.
But because what you do is you shuffle to the right, then you shuffle back to the left, and that's kind of what this is, because he obviously didn't want to answer the question because he's trying to portray himself as a centrist, as a person with traditional views.
Right.
But you could also tell he didn't want to offend his left-wing base, who thinks there's probably 50 or 60 or who knows how many genders.
Right.
And so finally, after being pressed on it, he said, well, I think there's 2, but if there's more. And so here's this is what we're seeing here. This is a guy who appears to be shuffling to the right or to the center now to try to win some votes. And when he comes back, and if he were to be elected governor, you can count on some very left-wing policies. That's what's happened in Virginia. Glenn Youngkin was a good governor, got a lot of things done, and now this new governor there ran on some very center-type positions, and now is completely reversing those things. It's a real mess.
So ran in the center and then went as far left as he could as soon as he took office.
Yeah. So people there are very upset.
I think a lot of us are kind of scared of that here in this election cycle. I've heard you speak a number of times now. Your platform obviously roots right into the Declaration of Independence. And, you talk about our rights coming from God, not government, with life being as one of those fundamental rights, drawing from your decades of pro-life work through, of course, Informed Choices medical clinics, and I think pastoral counseling as well. How do you believe Iowa can best protect the unborn while practically supporting still mothers and families and that culture of life that I think we believe is necessary here in the state?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we made incremental steps, I would call advancements, but I voted for the heartbeat bill, which prevents surgical abortions after 6 weeks.
Yes, thank you.
Or when there's a heartbeat. And so, but I knew it was not the best bill at the time, but it was a step forward. But now what we have is mail-in chemical abortions, the pills being mailed into our state. We have no way of really counting or knowing how many abortions are taking place. So the question remains, have we really cut back abortions?
Right.
Now, are they even more dangerous than they were before because these don't have any doctor's oversight and that sort of thing? So I believe life begins at conception, and we have to keep working to get a conception bill passed to protect the unborn. And that's just where I'm going to be. I'm going to keep working to get that done. We
Yeah, I
have to
love that.
protect life. So
Just recently, I was having a conversation with Rachel, who is there as part of that Informed Choices Medical Clinic, and she was talking about the abortion pill and just the lasting damage that causes in the body of the young lady or just woman that's taking that, and how after time, as they maybe use it once and then we'll use it again, and then, oh well, I've had a scare, I might use it again, what it does to the body. And those kinds of things, I just don't think they're talked about enough. The long-term damage that these kinds of things are causing because of a short-term problem. Now, a lot of people don't think, hell, baby is not a short-term problem. They don't even want to call it a baby. They'll call it a fetus, which, if you get into the grammar and structure of that, it's actually referring to a life, a human life inside of a woman. But, it is one of those areas, as a pastor, I'm very passionate about. And I know a lot of people in the conservative community are. And so I really do appreciate that, your heart is to stand for the unborn. Let me ask you this. There's that term out there, abolitionist. How do you feel about abolishing abortion completely at any level, at any time? And I know that's a hot button, so I'm putting you on the spot.
Well, I mean, that's the position we're talking about here. If you go to life at conception, then if it's a life, it's a life, and so, but the abolitionists, they're pressing that hard, and they make some very good points.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any specific questions on that. But.
Well, for me, I mean, Psalm 127:3 says, "Lo, children are the heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is His reward." So I think for a lot of folks who see things the way that you just said, life begins at conception. That abortion at any time is difficult to comprehend. And so, I just appreciate that we're headed in the right direction. I heard you speak just the other night, and you were talking about, the need that we have as a people to, correct our thinking. We were talking about, you were talking about overturning Roe versus Wade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe you can expand on that a little bit, bringing it back to the state level versus it being at the federal level. I found that very interesting.
Well, first, I would just say that defining the baby in the womb as a person, when we get to that point, then many of these other questions go away.
Sure.
Because it's a person.
There you go.
We give them personhood. And so the personhood movement is out there too. And that goes, so, and that's the argument I made on the floor of the House when we were debating the heartbeat bill. And I referred to Scripture, Jeremiah 1:5, where God told, the word says of Jeremiah, "Before you were formed in the womb, I knew you."
Right.
And so he had a calling, he had a purpose. All this was a preset. And so God knows every one of us at the moment of conception, if not before, in God's economy. I don't even know how. I can't even wrap my head around that.
I know.
But nevertheless, so there's no excuse for that for a Christian who believes in the Bible to say anything except life at conception has to be protected. And then, of course, the whole thing with Roe versus Wade, what we heard was that now this has been overturned, and everybody was happy about that. But then they tell us now it's back to the states,
right,
where it belongs. Well, I don't think it does belong in the states. I think it should be a federal ban, a federal issue, because the Declaration of Independence, the birth certificate of our nation, the first federal document that we have as this, under this Constitution, and everything it says that that a certain unalienable right is life.
Right.
And even in the 1600s, they had laws against abortion. So, so this wasn't like abortion. They'd never heard of it back then. Of course, they knew what it was.
Right.
And life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness were three of the unalienable rights that the Creator, God, gives to us. And so that's a federal document. It's a federal issue. Murder is a federal crime.
Right.
And so if this is a person, it's murder. How can you say it's okay for me to kill you here, but we can go across the state line and now it's not? That doesn't work. And so, it just doesn't make any sense. And so that's the whole thing. It's an arbitrary line on a map, and that's the point I like to make all the time. And so with abortion, it's just an arbitrary line in time. Is it, 30 weeks, 20
Right.
weeks, 15 weeks, 10 weeks. Where do you draw the line? Well, it's just arbitrary. And so you have to go to a higher authority, and that's where we go to God.
Let's talk about another hot button issue, property taxes. Iowans have raised, I think, this question. I would imagine on your campaign trail, you're having the question asked, at what point do we lessen the property taxes for families, seniors, or farmers? How does your understanding of biblical stewardship, liberty, and even limited government guide your approach to meaningful tax relief and even local accountability?
Yeah. Well, property is again, this a pursuit of happiness, and the Declaration is primarily about property rights. I think they broadened that language a little bit to include the right to work and enjoy the fruit of your labors and own property. I think is kind of what that means. Other places in our Constitution, it just says it that way: life, liberty, and property. And talks about protecting those things. But this is one of those issues where property taxes, if taxes get too high, it's essentially a socialism. It's just simply government owns everything, and we have to rent it from our government.
Right.
So I'd like to get to a point where, at some point in life, people who work hard and pay off mortgages, whatever, or inherit property or whatever,
Sure.
Should be able to get to the place where they truly own their property and don't rent it from the government.
Yeah.
Because I've talked to several people in this campaign who are elderly now, and they've been now they're on a fixed income, maybe a retired person or whatever, and their property taxes keep going up. They go up, but their income stays the same.
Right.
And so now they're having to sell their home that they raised their families in, lived all their life, but I got to sell it because I can't pay rent to the government for my house.
Right.
So I think there has to be something done about that. I know there's pluses and minuses to every plan, but this is something I've been looking into. I think, and I'm going to keep looking into this and try to figure out a way to make it work, because we all know that we have to have taxes to pay for our public services,
Right.
and that's just a fact. There's going to be taxes someplace, somewhere. But the right to actually eventually own your home is a big deal. So I'll just break down for you, if you want to, since you're asked the question, a little bit of what I'm thinking here. Again, it's something we're still looking at. But if you've lived in Iowa for 10 years, at least, or maybe 15, I don't know what the number would be.
Sure.
And then you retire or you reach a certain age, then your primary residence, and I'm not saying all land and all businesses,
Right.
but your primary residence at least could be tax-free, property tax-free.
Wow.
Now, we would have to replace that revenue with something.
Yeah.
Obviously, we don't want to just jerk the rug out from under all the county supervisors. They get upset when you talk about that,
Sure.
because they've got a tough job trying to make
there's a budget trying to make it all work.
Yeah, they got a tough job making everything work. But if we can find a way to replace that, but here's some of the benefits that I see. First off, you would have to have people. You'd have to live here for some period of time in advance. Otherwise, people would just retire in Illinois and then move here.
Right. Right.
So if you live here, so this could cause our population to grow. It could cause it to stabilize. Instead of retiring and moving to Florida, now I'm going to retire and move and live here.
Right.
And so you make plans to do that. Then maybe families would stay around.
Right.
So this could help stabilize our population, maybe create some growth. And then, of course, if people live here, then they spend money here.
Yep.
They pay sales tax here. They participate in the economy. They buy gasoline. They do all the things here instead of Florida.
Right.
Or Arizona or whatever.
I know. You're hearing all these Tennessee. People are flocking other places because our property taxes here are significantly higher. When we moved here from Arizona, it was sticker shock. I was blown away by how much more property taxes were here than they are there.
Well, I don't know how exactly to replace that income at first, but I think you could phase this in, maybe a small sales tax. I don't know, but I think it could potentially pay for itself by people moving here, because that's another thing with property taxes is that we need to grow our population. And if we got more population, then we spread out the burden for the property tax. I mean, you have 10 people living in a town, they need the same road that 100 people need.
Right.
So if you can spread it out among 10 people or 100 people, which is better? Well, if you spread it out with 100 people, it's going to be cheaper. So that's the whole thing. We need to grow our population, increase our tax base, and anything we can do to keep people living here, planning to live here, keep their families living here. There are lots of things we can do on that, and I'm open to all the good ideas we can get to make that happen. So, but I think that's something that speaks to the property tax, and I think another thing that could lower property tax, which doesn't take a replacement of income, is just cutting waste and fraud. We
There
all
you
know
go.
about the fraud that we heard about in Minneapolis, Minnesota,
Right.
and all that. Hopefully, I don't, and I'm confident that it's not that bad here.
Yeah.
But I think we're naive to think that there is none of that in our state.
Sure.
I mean,
Everywhere.
I've seen it, and I think if we can just again get a really good auditing system in place, and that's why I don't hold back from advocating for Abby Moss running for auditor. She's got some great ideas that I think should be implemented in the state. And if we had some transparency in how money is being spent, then the local people would take care of business. They would see how their local money is being spent.
Yes.
And that's a plus too, because in Des Moines, when you make a bill to fix property taxes, well, it might help one place, but the other county over here, it doesn't help any.
Right.
And so, so one size fits all is usually what comes out of Des Moines. Well, that doesn't work. One size
Right.
doesn't fit all.
Yeah, not in a state like this, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. And so this is where we need to push. The solutions need to really come out of a local governance, and the local people are the ones that know what's going on here more than somebody sitting in Des Moines,
Yeah.
who happens to be from the other side of the state.
Right.
They're the ones that understand this the best, and so we need to push government to the local level as much as we can. But I think there are things we can do on a state level to create the transparency,
Yeah.
and that's because state government does have a job to do, and we need to make sure we understand what those jobs are and which jobs do not belong to the state government.
Right. Man, I love that plan. There's a lot to be said for continued oversight, but looking for ways to lessen the tax burden and, making sure that, like you said, people aren't just hopping over here from other places last minute, not spending all of their years of sales tax and everything along the way. You're right. There could be a nice offset there. And for those people that do stick around and don't end up again in Arizona, Florida, Tennessee, Nevada, all of these places where the property taxes are much lower. Even I know Governor DeSantis down there in Florida is abolishing property taxes, and it looks like it's dragging people across state lines already. So I would love to see Iowa bolster its population and solve these problems and help people that like you said are on a fixed income. Their property taxes keep going up, but as they age, they need more of that fixed income for health products and health issues. And, so I really appreciate that plan. Let's push into a similar conversation with eminent domain and I guess the abuse thereof, particularly, the private projects like the carbon pipeline on family farmlands. I've heard you talk about that of late. There's a real flashpoint conversation in rural Iowa with all of these things. You've called property sacred, God-given rights that, these are fiercely protected or should be. What lessons from your house service and even your own expertise and experience and development would you bring to the table to, I think, limit eminent domain as governor?
Well, my first week in the legislature, I attended a hearing and I heard the testimonies of several people whose property rights were being violated. One lady was being sued. She was in tears. And this was going on before I got there, of course, too.
Sure.
But it was still relatively new. And I think maybe a session or two before the public was just becoming aware of it, or maybe the legislature. But nevertheless, I heard these testimonies, and it was clear that this is not right. I mean, I always put it this way: a private company who's not a common carrier for a product that's not a public utility should never ever get to use eminent domain. That's just the bottom line.
Yeah, I love that.
Eminent
Simple,
domain.
straightforward.
Yeah, but I've recently just understood. I made that statement at a meeting over in Boone, Iowa, and one lady said, "Well, but I don't understand this. What's going on? What's this all about?" And so I realized that a lot of people haven't looked into it deeply. So I I'll explain the basics. First off, we have ethanol plants in Iowa. They're producing ethanol. And if you've ever seen one, there's a big cloud that goes up into the sky,
Right.
and that's carbon dioxide. And so there's a premise that's out there. The carbon capture climate people tell us that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, and it's causing global warming. It's going to destroy our planet. Da 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 da. Well, I'll just tell you that's a load of baloney. I've had one of the top scientists. Now, I believe in clean air and clean water like everybody else, but CO2 is not the problem. I had a top scientist from one of our universities told me that he said there's nothing humans can do to produce enough CO2 that's going to hurt our atmosphere. He said, but I can't say that or I would lose my job.
Oh, wow.
and so that's what's going on. There's this premise out there that we've got to take care of this problem. So anyway, back to the ethanol plants. You got this cloud going up. They're producing CO2. It's going into the atmosphere. And they're going, oh, no, this is a problem. So we've got something on the federal level called the 45Q and the 45Z tax credits. And if you do something to capture carbon or if you put it in a pipeline, then and go bury it underground someplace in North Dakota for some reason, then we're going to give you all these tax credits.
Right.
And tax credits are a marketable commodity. I mean,
Sure.
You can sell those things and they're worth a lot of money. I mean, so there's billions of dollars to be had by building a pipeline. And so so there's people that want to capture the CO2 and they want to compress it into a pipe, into a supercritical state, which is almost liquid, and then put it in a pipeline under about 2,500 pounds per square inch, maybe more.
Oh, wow.
And ship it up to North Dakota to bury it in the ground where it can't hurt anybody. Well, a couple problems with that. One, it's dangerous. It's not your average pipeline. It's way more dangerous. It's under much higher pressure. If it ever ruptured, that cloud would go down into the low-lying areas and smother anything that breathes oxygen.
Oh, wow.
And there really was a rupture of a CO2 pipeline in Shattarsha, Mississippi a few years ago, and nobody died, but several people went to the hospital, and it was a big deal because there was a lot of rain, the earth shifted, ruptured the line. So it's dangerous. Not only that, they want to run this pipeline right past homes, right past schools, and not only that, they want to take people's property through eminent domain to get right away for the pipeline. And so that's where this whole issue comes to.
Right.
And then, of course, now we're learning that they don't really want to bury it in the ground. What they want to do is take it to an oil field that's not producing very well anymore and inject it into the ground to force out more oil. So all this is
like fracking, basically.
Yeah, almost like fracking. So all this is basically designed to get taxpayers to pay for a private company's enrichment. And so this is wrong on so many levels.
Yeah.
So there's the premise, the CO2, there's the danger of the pipeline, and then there's the problem with using eminent domain for a private company. Because if it was natural gas or if it was something like that, or if it was a water line or a street, nobody likes eminent domain, but sometimes we have to have those things.
Right.
But we don't go to our faucet and turn on a faucet and get CO2 out of it.
Right.
It's not a public utility that everybody needs. It has a use. It's a commodity, and these guys are wanting to get the public to pay for their enrichment, and so this whole thing needs to go.
It's not a plan for the people.
No, it's not a plan for the people.
It's a plan that will get a few people rich, but the majority of the people in the state are going to pay for it. That doesn't sound like something the state of Iowa should be behind, but we find ourselves at those crossroads as well. Yeah. So we've only got a few minutes left. What would you like the folks within our listenership to know about you? If they've never met you before, have never heard you speak, what are some key principal issues that you think could help them understand who you are, what you stand for? So when they go to that polling booth, they're more educated to know who they want to vote for.
Well, I guess I've shared a lot of these things all across the state already, but I grew up doing a lot of blue-collar work, operating dozers and drag lines and heavy equipment, doing farm drainage work.
Yeah.
I surrendered my life to Jesus Christ in 1974, the same night I met my wife.
I love that.
We got married 5 months later. We went into ministry training, and I've been a pastor now for 46 years, 45 of those years in the Iowa City area. We moved there to start a church, and that's where I saw the left-wing indoctrination taking place, and that's why I started working to try to restore the foundations of freedom because I saw that our freedom was being eroded.
Right.
And so that's the slogan for our campaign, Restoring the Foundations of Freedom. But it's not just a slogan. It's something that's been my heartbeat for decades. And so our freedoms are under attack.
Right.
We're literally in a war for our freedoms. In fact, we had this event in your church here not just a few days ago.
Yeah.
And there was a young lady that was telling me her story about coming from Canada. She said, we used to think that way. And she heard me say that comment about losing our freedoms. And she said, we used to think all those things could never happen here, but then one day they did.
Right.
And so if we don't understand how government is supposed to work, and if we don't stand up for those principles, then we won't know when it's not working. And by the time we realize our freedoms have been undermined, it'll be too late. And she said, that's what's happening in Canada. It's too late. We had to leave. We had to flee Canada.
It's Alex and Sarah. It's a real cautionary tale.
Yeah. So that story really struck me as a confirmation. I've been saying this for years, but nevertheless. So that's who I am. I have these principles deeply in my heart. It's not just something I learned about because I went to a seminar, and now I'm parroting those facts. These things are ingrained in me. They have been over 4 decades. I want Iowa to be the freest place it can be, and I'm not going to back down on that. I will never back down on that. And so, and I want people to know that I am not bought and paid for. I didn't ask any donor or any organization to get behind me. I didn't ask them, will you get behind me if I'm going to run for governor?
Wow, okay.
This was a decision that my wife and I prayed about, and God confirmed it so strongly that that's why we chose to do it. Now, of course, after that, I did ask people to get behind me.
Sure.
We do need help. We do need, donations. This is expensive running a campaign,
I can imagine, yeah.
And so, but a lot of the big donors who expect favors for supporting a candidate are not coming to me because they won't get a favor. I'm going to do what's right for the people of Iowa. So I want people to know that I'm not bought and paid for. I want people to know that I speak truth. I don't make deceitful, misleading statements. It's not who I am. And I've got a history of integrity and truth in business dealings as well as in my family life. So that's who I am. I think I've proven that over a long period of time. And so that's a picture, a little bit of picture of who I am. Like you said, I've been a pastor for 45 years here, and I believe serving this state is an extension of that in some respects.
Yeah.
You always look out for people and try to help them be the best they can be, and help them be as successful as they possibly can. That's been my goal forever with anybody I've ever dealt with. I want them to be successful.
Yeah.
It's not about me. I don't have a lot of money. I've never been rich. And at this point in life, I don't care about getting rich.
Right.
God said he would take care of my needs, and that's all I need.
Amen.
And that's that.
Yeah.
So I'm not in this for a career. I'm not in this to make a lot of money. God promised a long time ago he would take care of me, and he has never failed.
Amen. Amen.
And so that's just
Lord
where I
we
live.
serve.
So I hope that speaks to people. My website is shermanforiowa.com, and you can go there and get some more details. We've got a list of endorsers there that endorse us. We got issues, we got interviews, links, all kinds of things there if people want to research and find out more about me.
I love it. Well, I will say that I've known you for close to 5 years now. Everybody that I meet that's known you for decades, what I hear from them about you is basically what you just told us. You're a man of character. What you say, you will do. And I think that speaks volumes. And so I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming and, having this conversation, the crossroads of faith and politics. The fact is, these conversations are necessary. We're going to continue to have them. Listen, if you're listening and there's somebody on your heart that you'd like me to talk to, I'd love to hear from you. So go ahead and reach out. You can email me at jeremy@grassrootsiowa.com, and we'll start having some of those conversations. But if you want to learn more about Brad Sherman, I highly encourage you, go to his website, check him out. Brad, you want to give us that website address again?
Yeah, shermanforiowa.com.
shermanforiowa.com. Thanks for tuning in. God bless you.